Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. The tigers are everywhere. Vicious tigers abound all around us. Yet, in all actuality, no one can save us from them. That is, no one who is still going on automatic pilot as it relates to the mind of the Putujjana, the common, ordinary human being, lost in their drives, stimuli, response, action, reaction, tit for tat, very predictable and lazy. The mind is very lazy in its default mode. It does not like to do work. In fact, it's not just the mind, the body as well. Ask any athlete. They will tell you how hard it has been to reach a certain level, but above all, to maintain the body in that position, in that level of performance, endurance, fitness. So majority of people, majority of beings, Putujjanas, the Buddha called them, have minds that are unfit. And they're very much okay with that situation. Why? Because life has plenty of distractions, plenty. Hence the tigers. Time also is one of those menacing forces, inevitable. The Buddha used many similes, metaphors, analogies to demonstrate his teaching, to elaborate, to expound his teaching. Different minds grasp, understand, see, and come to know in different ways. So we have that tradition from him, the great teacher, in the manner that one may use metaphors to understand. How to remove a person's mind, how to remove our mind, this status quo, from being so inundated, so enamored, so surrounded by all that's going on around us. All that bait that is being thrown at us, which we keep biting and biting and biting. Today it's one thing, tomorrow it's something else. But they work beautifully when it comes to keeping the mind in that lazy state of inactivity and not doing the necessary work in dealing with the tiger head on. There's old age, there's sickness, there's death. Ultimately, even if we protect this body, they're always there. Who are we kidding? Who am I saving this body for? The worms? The embers of fire? The vultures? At least the undertaker? Who am I saving it for? But the body is here for us to use. Just like this brain that we have. We need to use it. We need to exercise it. And that's what you're doing every time you sit and meditate. Not only that, that's what you're doing when you're sitting, when you're living your life, rather, with sila, with adherence to the training rules, which requires discipline. Now we're talking the same language as that athlete. Talk to an athlete and they will tell you how hard it is to actually get that six-pack, to get the body to move in a certain way, because it's not going to fall off into your lap from the sky. Anything that we have ever come to accomplish, to achieve, whether it's demonstrated on a piece of paper, like a diploma, a degree, or levels of understanding, of skills in our professions, that didn't come overnight. That required discipline. Hence, the discipline that is needed of developing one's mind, because that is the only way we're going to be able to deal with the tigers of life. You know, in the old days, I'm hoping there are still, I have a feeling there are some bhikkhus who actually still practice this in the jungles, in the forests, in Asia. They would go out and live for extended periods of time in the jungles, in the forests, where tigers roam freely. Not only tigers, but elephants, wild elephants. These aren't the ones that you go and pet at the zoo. They see you from afar, they can sense you, they can smell you, and they will come and establish their territory by stomping on you, in the case of the elephant, or throwing things at you, in the case of wild monkeys. And in the case of the tiger, coming and take a big bite out of you and see how sweet is your flesh. Now, if you're that bhikkhu, if you're that person who's there, you cannot afford to be lazy, that's for sure. The person will know the immediacy of danger. The immediacy of danger. They cannot afford to be mindless, not present. Every step that they take, they need to make sure. Are they stepping on wild ants? Are they stepping on a venomous snake? How about that roar that they heard last night Does that mean that there's a tiger near my kuti, my hut? And I'm not even mentioning anything about the food, the daily food that they had to walk to get to the village in their bowl, if they got it. Now we're talking about from all aspects and avenues of just the purview is completely adding a new flavor to the sense of securing one's survival. Now, ultimately, the individual, if they have a good teacher and if they're practicing, most importantly, correctly, according to the teaching of Lord Buddha, they will come to see that the real tiger, in fact, is within their hearts, in their minds, in their kileshas, in their defilements. That's why we sit. That's why we practice. That's why we need, especially now, to be drenched in that sense of immediacy. That no one's going to do the work for me. Nobody. And no amount of me going outside of myself to deal with the tigers outside of myself, biting the bait that life keeps throwing at me, none of those, me being engaged with any of those things, will get rid of the tiger within me, specifically the defilements. Because the tigers outside around us will come and go. They will grab another prey, another victim, and somebody's gonna bite the bait. But I won't be able to escape my own kileshas unless I actually face them head on. And that is the work, that is the crux of the work that we need to do. Because you're not here to solve the world's problems, ultimately, because the world is always going to have its problems, period. You're not here to bring injustice into the world, because the world is always going to be unjust, unfair. Case in point, look at yourself in the mirror. All the time and effort that you put in to maintain this body, slipping through your fingers constantly. It's a losing battle. Hence, the Buddha always brought the attention back to looking at dukkha. Dukkha is not just something that we feel on our skin, like a pain, like it's that sense of dread, of impending doom that happens all the time. Every time we look at our skin and we see that it is not in our control. This old age, people around us that we have come to care and love, keep slipping away, get out of focus and drop out of the horizon all of a sudden. But modern ways of thinking have come up with so many tactics to have us evade all of these things, to postpone all of these things. Let's go outside and change the world. Let's go and do this. Let me take care of this first. Meanwhile, the house is burning. And it's burning fast. So the Buddha's encouragement has always been to get us out of the burning house as soon as possible. But unfortunately, the mind likes to dwell. It just likes to dwell on things, especially things that allow oneself to stick around a little bit more in the burning house. Says, oh, look over there, look at that painting in the house. Oh, look at the wall. Yes, I remember this. Oh, let's maintain that. Meanwhile, the house, the smoke is spreading, the fire is spreading. Yeah, but let's not look at that burning room. Let's look over here. And if you've ever seen a person on their deathbed, that's a person who has not worked on their mind, who has not worked on their liberation. That's a person who is screaming loudly, oops, there goes another life. I wish. So this path is not for those who like that mantra, I wish, to say that, I wish. I would have liked to have this happen. I should have done this. So the Buddha did his very best as a great teacher to show his students ways of eliminating, removing entirely that sense of regret, that sense of remorse. There was once a person, I think I might have mentioned it in the previous talk, who came to the Buddha and he asked, Bhante, could there be that despite all these wonderful teachings you give, could there be people who, although you give them this teaching, yet somehow not be able to attain, not be able to experience the fruits? Magga Phala Nibbana, to be completely free of suffering. Could there be such people? Your own students, your own bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. And the Buddha says, do you know the place? You're from here, right? You're from these parts. He says, yes. So you know the territory, the countryside, and the villages and the roads? He says, yes. He says, what if you have a stranger coming in to these parts of India, and he's trying to get to Rajgir? Do you know the way to Rajgir? He says, of course. And he says, you would do it this way, you take this road and take a left on this, after you walk this much, etc., etc. And then you make a right over here and you see this, and then it's 5 minutes away on your left, the main gates to the city. You can't miss it. He says, okay, yes. He says, so another person comes up, and same way, you explain everything. But the difference between these two strangers in the land, one actually takes your advice and goes and finds Rajgir. The other one makes a detour and says, no, I'm going to take this other route, even though he doesn't know where he's going. Goes in the opposite direction. He says, the Buddha asks this man, will both of these individuals end up in Rajgir? He says, surely not, Bhante, because one of them actually listened to my advice. He heeded my advice. He says, exactly. Some of my students will listen. They will heed my advice and they will do the work, because advice on its own, it's like a utensil that you never use, that you bought and it's in the cupboard, in the drawer. You never used it. It's useless. You never see the benefit of it. So similarly, one bhikkhu will get there, the other one will not. But that is where the responsibility lies within us. It's a very individually based responsibility. That's why we cannot rely on anyone else, because this is one's own life. One's own kileshas, one's own defilements, one's own tiger inside. When the body or the mind, in this case, is facing such a difficult life-threatening situation, suddenly it just drops down into the present moment. Suddenly, everything else stops. You won't be looking at the bait anymore, what's going on outside in the world, because you're looking at the big picture. You're looking at what is the most essential thing to be gaining my attention right now. So my encouragement to you today is to put things in the proper priority list. Unfortunately, for practicing mindfulness and meditation, which involves sati and sampajanya, when you think of the most basic bolts of it, nuts and bolts of it, just focusing on those too, as you're practicing your sila, of course. When you're mindful from moment to moment, you're going to be noticing these tendencies in the mind. Be curious as to what happened in those gaps when you were simply unconscious, you were totally unaware, or lost in your thoughts, in your own conceptualizations of things, in your own labeling of things, which is sanya, which is very dangerous. Sanya is number 3 of the 5 aggregates. Oftentimes we think it's a very passive thing. It's the thing that perceives, but just not only perceive, but it also labels things. It adds that thing in the box. If you have an empty box, they used to do this experiment, and it's empty and you shake it, there's nothing in it, so it's kind of boring. But you put a marble, you put a piece of rock, something in there, anything, a grain of rice, and you start shaking it, guess what? Now the mind wants to find out what it is. Open it up, shake it in millions of different ways. So labeling is, you can see it in that fashion as well. But it doesn't stay as just a label, as just a perception, as just a memory. Sankhara comes in and takes over. It's like a baton, like in a race, a relay race. All of a sudden, sankharas come in and they start to build things with that label. And now we are lost. So when it's mentioned how the mind is lazy, it's not just completely like inert, sitting there doing nothing. It is lost in these endless labyrinth pathways, lost while the house is burning. I mean, just to give you another image, a metaphor, because some of us learn through metaphors. Think of the walls being made up of thick, wet paint, sticky, wet paint. All these things that happen around the world, the baits, as I mentioned, or things that are going on, the outside tigers, all these things. The moment we get engaged, it's like our hand is now stuck with the paint. We touched it, we looked at it, and we look at it, it's like, oh, how pretty, or pushing the wall away. Well, guess what? You're going to get some of that thick paint on you. So the less engagement we have in being pulled into these stories, and more we focus on what is this doing to me? Is this distracting me? Well, distracting me from what? The mind was mindless. I was mindless. I was not remembering to maintain sati, to maintain what's going on in the mind. I was lost in all these different nuances of relationships and what ifs and this and that. So bring the mindfulness back. Use the tiger well. In fact, that's what many forest-dwelling bhikkhus do. They love to hear the roar of the tiger. And sometimes you see this, you read this in the stories of some of these arahants, these bhikkhus who lived, and probably do now, still some of their students, in the jungles where the tiger comes and sits right on their path, walking meditation path, where they do chankama. And it's not nicely laid out without any foliage or without any trees. You're in the jungle. So you have insects biting at you, you have all kinds of stuff coming, crawling, trying to feel you. And you have these two eyes popping out of the dark with large whiskers. Every once in a while, it lets loose a roar to remind you that you are in his or her domain. Now, what does that do to the heart? What does that do to the mind? Bhikkhus, if they're not prepared, they start shivering in their robes. But then again, you find bhikkhus, individuals who are willing to just keep on walking, accepting the fact that this is a tiger, this is a walking path, and this is a human body that I occupy. And this is the mind. What is the mind doing? Because the tiger is going to do its thing. It might eat me. I mean, if it's my time, it's going to eat me. So big deal. It's my time. Plus, the tiger might be hungry anyhow. But if it's not my time, then what's all this fuss about? Both the tiger and I will die one day. So let me go back to business. Now, why am I here? Why am I even in the jungle? And that has to come from within oneself. No teacher can tell you what that is, or that aha moment that comes after that. And then as the person is persevering, developing that patience to keep on walking back and forth, the tiger actually serves as a support to allow the mind to drop back down to a deep, 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 deep level of samadhi. Because there's no escape. There's no escape to the outside world. You're not interested in the wet paint. You're not interested in the bait. No, that's foolishness at that moment. You see, and that's when the mind no longer is the mind of a putujjana. You're going more and more into the area of Arya Savaka, the noble disciples. And that's what we say, jnana dassana, to be able to see, to have the eyes to see deeper than what the world is throwing at us, to get us hooked, to waste another life. So I wanted to share these few words of promoting and cultivating a sense of urgency, which is absolutely necessary for each of us. Nothing to be taken granted of. So, granted for. So I would like to ask if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, critiques to jump in. Again, please, I can't see hands, so if you can just start talking, because the moment you speak, I'll see who it is. We'll take it from there. Make sure you're not muted meanwhile.
Thank you very much for the talk, Bhante. Um, I realized that you are talking about Maranasati for the most part of your talk, and I realized that Maranasati is by far probably the most effective form of meditation to rid us of to get to help us maintain sati effortlessly, because when we are mindful, when there is a mindfulness of impending death, there is no room for all other form of indulgence in the six sense spaces and and clinging on to the five khandhas. But having said that, I realize that it is probably not for everybody, because well, one probably needs to develop a very strong um, foundation in order to benefit from Maranasati.
Mm.
Um, in the suttas, I think there are many cases. There is mention of monks who are not mentally prepared to go into Maranasati ended up taking their own lives.
Mm.
Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, thank you for that, Upatissa. For those of you who don't know, or listeners, Maranasati is the contemplation or becoming mindful of the immediacy of death. Marana, death. Jati, birth. Marana, death. I was taught in the past by some teachers who, whenever the subject of meditation came, including the asubhas or the repulsive aspect of the body, for example, things that we cherish, as well as death, the contemplation of death, that specifically these two types of meditations need to be things or practices that are specifically for those who are not living the lay life, meaning bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. Yet, I grew up in the 70s. I was raised in the Middle East, and I was exposed to all around me death. I was on the verge of dying myself because of injuries in wartime. I was only 8. I've mentioned this story before, so I won't go into that. But especially now in the world, the techniques that we have used to kind of camouflage or to subdue or suppress the fact of death are becoming more and more porous and transparent. What I mean by that is people are becoming more cognizant of death. A few years ago, I remember YouTube was allowing, I don't know if they still do, the massacre of people. One in particular was a Christian priest who in Syria who was decapitated on camera by individuals who were cheering on the person who was doing the act. It was shocking to me to see that people were like, yeah, watching it in millions. These are not watched by bhikkhus, necessarily. So the immediacy of the fact that there is death has always been there. It's except that we have had layers to camouflage it, to kind of tone it down. So we can actually put our attention on what the senses are giving us. Usually things that are of a great, opposite nature. Now, this is not a pessimistic position. This is just a realistic position. I wouldn't want anyone to construe this talk or even by extension Lord Buddha's teachings as pessimistic. I've mentioned this many times, not just myself, but other teachers have as well. Because that's where naturally the intellect goes. Because remember, the mind is lazy. It likes to label things to get the focus off of what is really important, because it is uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable to talk about death, to talk about old age. I know people who don't want to step into a hospital, even though they are like, for 80 years, they're over 80. They still don't want to step a foot into a hospital, even if their loved ones are in the hospital. Tells you about the delusion that the person has convinced themselves with for all their life. So coming back to Marana Sati, I don't find it anymore to be just an area for bhikkhus or bhikkhunis to be practicing it, to put it, out there. In answer to your question or comment to your response to your comment. Because now more than ever, everybody's dealing with, oh my, what's going to happen? You hear Uncle Joe has a cough, or he's sick, or my grandmother is not feeling well. Immediately the mind is going where? Oh, they might have COVID. What is that? Initially, when you heard somebody was sick, it was just somebody was sick. Oh, they'll get over it. Why don't you take some, go see the doctor if it's really, really bad. Now we're thinking in our head, in our mind is like, well, wait a minute. If this continues for a few days, they might be taken to the ICU. Whoa, what happened? Because people are dying around us. And the magnifying glass of the media is on these deaths. So we are inundated with all this data coming in. Hence, Marana Sati is imposing itself into our lives now. So the old tricks are not working. And ultimately, we need to think about, everybody is in samsara, everybody is suffering. The Buddha did not he did not share the Dhamma simply or only to bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. He didn't do that just for them. When a person has right view, it doesn't matter if they are in robes or not. And plus, everyone will die. Not might die, but everyone will die. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a taboo, because in Indonesia, there are some tribes who actually keep the dead body in the attic. Oh yes, that's Grandma Mary. She's been there for the last 65 years. You mean she lived? No, she's been up there for 65 years. It's just normal for them. So our attitude, I'm not saying we need to normalize it either, because that's dangerous. We become numb. But the thing that we forget oftentimes, and this is crucial for us to bring in the mindfulness part, into just thinking, hey, this skin is actually just a bag, a sack of what? Well, it's carrying some things. What is it carrying? It's carrying bones. Yes, bones. Lots of blood, veins, arteries, ligaments, joints, muscles, and tons of other things in there. So I am one of those individuals who will not shy away from talking about these facts, because these are facts and everyone will die. So the sooner the person comes to understand these, and this does not necessarily mean that that person has to stop living or enjoying what the body can do, to go for a run, to go on a hike, to enjoy sitting next to a waterfall. No. The bhikkhu who is aware of these things now is on that deep level, is now free because they've seen the body for what it is and they've penetrated it, and now they're jovial, they're so happy. You go and talk to them, it's not like a gloom, you get depressed just to be next to them. No. There's a sense of lightness when there's right view, especially when the person goes deeper and deeper. So contemplation of death, one's own death, by the way, and there's different gradations of it. If you can just think of just this skin, think of it as a plastic bag that carries all these bones. Every time you go somewhere from room to room, you're actually carrying your bones with you. It adds another nuance, another flavor. Suddenly your mind falls into mindfulness a lot quicker. You're not buying into the bait, into the stories that the world throws at you. So yeah, we can say so much about this, but I'd like to see if there's other thoughts, comments, questions. I think I saw a hand. Please go ahead and speak if because I'm not seeing any hands. When we were children, we were not allowed to see our loved ones who had passed away, to go to their funeral, to the cemetery when they were being buried and things. They would hide it from us. In fact, so much so that they would even tell us well-intentioned lies, I guess, but lies nevertheless. I think most of us can relate to this. So we're trying to sugarcoat things. And one of the best ways that the mind does things is by sugarcoating things to keep the status quo. Meanwhile, the conveyor belt is taking us further and further and further to the end of the life, or when things are too late, to the oops moment. And although the Buddha had such a huge following, nevertheless, compared to the other teachers, many students actually shunned the Buddha's teachings as well, because they considered it to be too hardcore, if I can use that term, too factual, too much responsibility on the individual, versus just saying a set of words or believing in something and that's the end of it, or even believing in the Buddha's words. Because the interesting thing about the Buddha's path, the Dhamma, is that each of you, each of the individuals, each of us has to do their own due diligence and going and testing the words of the teacher, these things that I'm sharing with you. Please don't believe or buy any of it, and none of it, unless you see it holding the test of water, doing your litmus test, improving it, whether they are, yeah, they're evidence-based. Yes, I see their validity. But you will be the one who will confirm that. But that's a tremendous responsibility on an individual. A normal putujana is not wanting to do that. That's why they're called common, ignorant, ordinary human being. So it's a lot easier to go off to another person who says, worship me, believe what I'm saying. Oh, easy, done. So yeah, we have tremendous responsibility for ourselves, above all. So any thoughts, comments?
Well, I think, Bhante, I think it is kind of hardcore. That's why, sometimes they get a little bit, I don't think I could get through this kind of 12-step program since, usually all the negative things you talk about, I'm addicted to, like not exactly 100%, but, maybe 80%. So, I just feel a little bit, not exactly despondent, but I don't think I do not think I could live up to, these type of responsibility or kind of a hardcore in your face, recognition and stuff. I just, my addiction is really a little bit too powerful. It's not exactly addicted to drugs, but, I'm addicted to all the things you mentioned. That's why sometimes I it's hard to actually respond because, well, I sometimes feel, I'm the exact example of an addict. So I do not think, I know people who have gone through 12-step programs, for instance, for drugs and alcohol. And, I feel, they have to do it constantly, like, a couple of times a week. And there are certain kind of rules and regulations in order to get through. So I think it's a really pretty hardcore, and not most of the time, but at times I actually feel, well, I'll use I'm not going to use that 4-letter word, but well, I'll just be an addict then, It just seems really daunting. A lot of times, I just think it's too high a level for me to attain. Anyway, that's just my own, from an addict's point of view. I mean, I'm sure other people in the group are at a higher level, which is good, but I just can't.
May I say something in response to Russell, and also to hark back to the first thing that was said in today's session?
Please hold that thought. I just wanted to make sure that Russell finished his thought, and then I'll have you continue.
Yeah, I'm finished. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. KK, go ahead.
The day began, I think, before Russell came in, when I think it was Yupatissa who said that when we feel that our life is almost like so well, everything is well, then we know that something is wrong. And I really like that because when Russell and I are very good friends, so when he and I are very different, so I have felt that, gee, how come it's so much harder for him to give up all these so-called addictions, whereas for me, it seems so easy. I mean, taking the 5 precepts, it just seemed to me so easy that I just feel, what's the point of going through the ceremony if I can just practice the 5 precepts daily? Till a loved one, my loved one, is an addict. And then I just feel, wow, it's actually so much harder to deal with someone with addiction than being an addict yourself, especially when you feel that the addiction could cause that person's life. So, so it's very ironic that just because, and also it is even harder when you also read in other great books saying that you have to separate the illness from the individual. And when the addiction is part of a mental illness, say, it's even harder, just because the person did not acknowledge that they feel that the addiction is what makes them creative and all that. So I'm just kind of connecting the two parts of this talk, saying that actually the having to deal with an addict, not with Russell, but with another person, it makes me really realize how important it is to have the hardcore Dhamma as a saving grace. So it still helped me so much in the worst of times to, as you say, protect myself, no matter what is going on.
Yes, thank you, both of you. When we are dealing with any situation, it's very easy to fall into the trap of having a symptomatic view of things, or like Western medicine typically is known as just looking at the symptoms, not the causes of it. And which is, for many reasons, a valid statement, I believe. Now, similarly, when we're looking at the situation or the condition of addiction, I was talking with another student the other day, and I said, we're actually, the addicts are not a small or a large group of the population. They're all of us. We're all now addicts of some sort. We cannot just look at the alcoholic person, let's say, and say, oh, you're an addict, and I'm not. Well, we're all addicts, especially in this digital age. And I'm not even talking about just electronics or the iPhone or the computer or the email or texts. Looking for distractions. The Buddha was the first one, in the way I have researched it, who has seen the power of addiction, the presence of addiction, which he called actually avidya. Avidya is another way of looking. Typically, the translators and teachers have translated it as, still do, as ignorance. Ignorance. Or delusion. Some call it even the absence of wisdom. Well, what is wisdom? The presence of mindfulness. What is mindfulness? The opposite. It's on the opposite pole of being addicted, which is a delusional state, which is a state where you're just escaping from things. This is where I'd like to connect it back to us having the tendency of just looking at the symptoms. Yes, I'm an addict and I can't get out of this ditch. I'm sorry. I tried, I'm trying, but I can't get out of it because I'm an addict. Meanwhile, all of us are avoiding the causes that are leading me back, not have led me back in the past tense, in the far distant past, but are doing it currently. Hence, the person's presence still in that state. So this is where we need to look at the first noble truth. Is there suffering? Yeah. Ask the addict. They will tell you. Ask any one of us. Yeah, there's suffering. Okay. Where is the suffering coming from? How is it originating? This is when we're treading closer and closer to wisdom. Because now we're asking the most important questions. What is the thing which is leading the person to stay as an addict? Stay. So yes, there is an element of choice. This goes against to the disease model that people keep promoting. The person still has some choice there somewhere. On some level, it might be very, very faint. So gathering yourself around Kalyana Mittas is extremely important, even when it is extremely difficult for you to maintain a precept, even the single one. If you have a house, as an addict, you have a house, let's say, and you try to maintain good, housekeeping and all that. You make sure it's clean, or at least the kitchen table, the dining table. But then you see a pile of ants when you wake up in the morning, a mound of ants crawling. What do you do? What do you think, first of all? I must have left something out on the table. I didn't clean well enough. And what do? You start cleaning. Even though the person is an addict, they're cleaning up their dining table. Why, though? Because they don't want to see that mess on the table. They want to make sure that the ants don't crawl on the table or in their bed. How's that? Your bed. There are cockroaches crawling into you. Something must have happened, at least if they're not clean, so we need to clean them, right? So the mind starts to think in finding solutions. Why? Because it has seen and identified a problem. So there's an element of wisdom there. And what is the person doing? They are taking action. So in our culture, we have been able to somehow convince ourselves that this is okay, this is not okay. And this is where we need to be extremely careful with who we surround ourselves with. The people around me, are they the ones who look at me and say, yeah, the ants being there are okay? Soon enough, I'm going to start thinking like them. So it's no longer going to be a problem. In fact, I'm not going to have anything to do with it because, hey, the ants show up. I have nothing to do with it. Versus the person choosing to cut out certain bad influences from their lives, meaning bad friends, so-called friends, who are not enhancing one's own level of wisdom, quality of life. They're still stuck there for some reason. But the person, when they start to see what's happening and they at least remove a few of those, another higher level of that would be including individuals who are wiser than oneself. Suddenly things start to change. Suddenly things start to change. However, what I have seen both as a therapist and as just a teacher and an individual, I've seen a lot of people who keep doing the same things, making the same choices, especially the choices of being surrounded by certain individuals or certain other habits that are conducive to bring about the nasty state of affairs that makes them feel even worse. And they want to run away from that. So it's a very human thing. It's painful. If you've ever spoken to an addict, it's painful. They're trying to escape that dukkha, that pain, just to get that calm. Now, the Buddha's antidote to this was the precepts. The precepts are not there as a punishment. So if you indulge me, Russell, I know you're a writer, you teach it, but that didn't come to you overnight. You read many books. You pushed yourself, you struggled, you pushed yourself to learn how to write, follow the line and then write on it. There's rules, there's clauses, there's different things that you need to adhere to as a writer. That is called discipline. And because of that, you can supply yourself with food, put food on the table, roof over your head, some sense of safety. So there's parts of ourselves that we have accepted that yes, discipline is necessary. One time when we were gathered at a temple, and I was still a upasaka, a lay disciple, and I was giving a Dhamma talk, a person asked me the same question, something along the same lines as to why are precepts necessary? Why is discipline necessary? And I asked them, how did you get here? They said, well, I walked through the door. How did you get to the door? Well, I drove here. From where? From my house, which is, let's say, 10 miles away. Okay. You drove here, yes. Did you follow rules? Or you just hit the ignition and you just started slamming against cars and the wall? How did you get out of your garage? First of all, how did you know which car to get into? Maybe you tried getting into your... So what am I saying? I'm not banal, making it too banal. These are things that we have taken for granted as, yeah, of course. The most important thing that these things lead to, that we're neglecting. Meanwhile, we're accepting the fact that in order for me to get good grades at school, I need to be disciplined enough to learn the material. In order for me to lose that weight, I need to be disciplined with my food intake, with my exercises. We accept these things, no questions. But when it comes to the mind, maintaining its health, well, it's up in the air, so it's okay. It's anything goes. No. That's one of the reasons why in the past I've insisted on repeating how this is more important than paying your rent. Make sure that you actually have money. Make sure that you have worked to pay for your rent, to make sure you have money to go buy food. This is more important than that. But for majority of us, that's not the case, because it has not reached that sense of urgency. We've accepted it as, yeah, it's like that far distant cousin that we never get to see, maybe once every 4 years, like a leap year or something. Or like an insurance policy that we have somewhere there. That all of a sudden we look for it, the numbers, the contacts, this and that, when we have encountered the accident, when we are in the accident. That's when it becomes important. And my urging here is the opposite, to make it important enough to start at the precept. The precepts are there for the mind, for my health, for my body, for my emotions. Why? Because I would be protecting myself. So long as the person is thinking that the precepts are coming from the outside, imposed upon me from the outside, there's a problem. I don't understand the meaning of the precepts then. It's the cleaning up of your table from all the food scrap at night, making sure it's nicely clean, that they don't come back. That is doing the precept. That is maintaining the training to keep the precept. Whose table? Your table. Otherwise, it's not only going to be ants, it's going to be cockroaches, it's going to be all kinds of interesting organisms walking around your dining table. So our own paradigm has to shift. It must shift. It should shift if we want changes to occur. Otherwise, we can point fingers and say, hey, the Buddha's path is hardcore. And yes, it is hardcore if we are living in delusion. Nobody wants to wake up from their sleep early in the morning, especially if they have to go to a meeting or something. If their body needs it, let's say. Hey, wake up, wake up. That is hardcore. That's what the Dhamma does. Hey, wake up. That's why it's a truth. It's a satcha. However, the ball is always in our, in our court. We do how we want to play it. This thing called life. The choices, starting with the friends we keep, the associations. Remember, when Venerable Ananda mentioned to the Buddha, referring to Venerable Sariputta, chief disciple with whom he was very close friends, he said, Lord, my friendship with Sariputta is half the spiritual, the holy life, half the spiritual path. And the Buddha corrects him and says, no, don't say that, Ananda. He says, your connection to your spiritual friend is all of your holy life, all of your spiritual path. Look at the emphasis the Buddha is placing on the people that we associate with. So we cannot take it lightly. So that is what I would like to share on those comments.
No, I agree. It's helpful. I feel much better. It's not, maybe my addiction is not as, not as bad as I initially expressed, especially with what you said about people. I mean, you can remove certain things, but you have to replace also. I mean, if you're surrounded with bad people, or then actually maybe you let go of them, but then there has to be some replacement also. So I think I do feel a little bit better. Thank you.
I'm glad. And absolutely, you're right when it comes to, it's not a matter of just removal. Remember the four aspects of right effort. The first two deal with removing and eliminating negative tendencies, negative thought, unwholesome thought, akusala karma. One is preventing, the other one is eliminating, pulling it from its roots, eradicating, so it doesn't repeat itself. But the Buddha doesn't stop there. He comes in with number 3 and 4. He says, now you need to cultivate the opposite, the kusala kamma, the positive, something positive. Introducing something positive to replace it with. And then you need to maintain that positive state. So mindfulness is a wonderful positive state. Oh, I curse a lot. I say the F word a lot, this and that. Okay. There was a time when I used to. We grew up, absolutely was not allowed, prohibited to use any vulgar language, this and that. There was no way that any of us, my brothers and my sister, myself, could speak in those terms. But over time, when I was in my 20s, I hung out with a friend at the time who's, every 5 words had 3 cuss words in it. So I thought it was cool. It was interesting. So eventually I developed that for a few years until my older brother, he actually pulled me aside and he said, because it slipped from my tongue, not in a mean way, but I was just saying it. And I had a younger brother who was a teenager, and my older brother pulled me aside and he said, do you realize what you just said? I made a vow that day not to do it. He just asked me, do you realize what you said? He just put me in front of a mirror. So bringing mindfulness into the picture suddenly allowed me to, the gaps became less and less. The frequency became wider and wider in me saying those words. And I would feel remorse, obviously, right after. So I wanted to eliminate that sense of regret and remorse because I really didn't want to say it. But as I was adding more drops of mindfulness, the frequency of me being mindless and saying things that I didn't want to say in the first place, or even wanted to say, they started vanishing. So it needs to be replaced. You're absolutely right. Sometimes people pull the weeds out of, wild weeds and plants from their driveway or something. And that's it. They expect that it won't come back. It will, unless you put something else in there. So the Buddha's antidote to that was the 4 right efforts. So choosing your friends, absolutely, it's part of the right effort. But prior to choosing the right friends, which is the 3rd and 4th of the 4 right efforts, we need to do 1 and 2, which is removing the introduction, the incoming of bad friends, and getting rid of the ones who have been there already, but they still perpetuate. They're not willing to change with us. Last year, after I went forth, I discovered that in my life, there were certain individuals that did not feel pleased of my choice of going forth. And I attempted my best to maintain, because they're good people. But eventually I came to the understanding that it's better if I just go forth, and some things have to drop, apparently. So I allowed that to take place as well, because my life is dedicated to the Dhamma, to teach the Dhamma, to practice the Dhamma. That's my life. So anyone who comes into my life needs to be reflective of that, promoting of that, or likes to smell that same air, if I may say. So let's exercise right effort in the in a healthy way, in the presence of mindfulness. So can't see the time, but are there any more questions, comments?
I know we don't have much time left, but I just want to take a quick opportunity to congratulate Russell. And I say that because, as Bante said, everybody is addicted in some way at some level. And it's our practice with the Dharma that makes us notice, brings that to our attention and makes it notices. And so for everyone that is addicted, the first step is to notice that we're addicted. And when Russell says that he's still addicted at 80%, I think it was that you said, with our practice, over time, we might notice that one day we're only addicted 70%. And that's success. That lets us know that it's working when we're only addicted 70%. And that when we see that it's working, that then gives us confidence that what we're doing, that with our practice continuing, we're going to continue to get down to 65% and then 60%. And then we've got a goal at the end to not have any addictions before. And all of the addiction are the hindrances. The craving and the aversion are addictions. The laziness, the restlessness, they're addictions. And the last of the hindrances is doubt. And when we see that with our practice, we can reduce the level of craving we've got, that gives us the confidence to keep going. That confidence is the end of that last hindrance. It's the end of doubt. And so just doing what you're doing is automatically going to remove all of those hindrances for you. And so congratulations.
Greg, thank you for that beautiful validation that was necessary to be said. Thank you for that. And it's just being able to see, in your case, Russell, week in, week out, you're here. I mentioned this to you, I think last time. I think you've only missed once. That is, you might not be appreciating it enough perhaps, but we definitely appreciate it because it takes effort, it takes planning, it takes discipline to show up and to sit. Even if you're not being able to sit for 10 minutes or 1 hour straight, still you're there. You have other things you could be doing, but you're not. Like Greg was saying, that confidence will grow. It grows drop by drop. Yes, drop by drop. And we have a different, we might call it faith. But whose faith? Faith in what? Faith in ourselves, in the confidence in oneself. Saddha, which is one of the 5 faculties, one of the spiritual faculties, 5 powers. If you don't have faith, you're not going to be able to muster up the courage, which is number 2. The energy, the vidya, to go ahead and push through the delusional state, push through. Mindfulness is not just passive. It takes effort. If, I think all of us can attest to this. It takes effort, but that effort comes from having the confidence. You know what? I can do this. I can do this. And when you have these three, confidence, virya, or the energy, persevering power, the willingness to go forward, then you will be able to maintain more and more mindful states, despite the situations. And this will allow the mind to slowly, slowly settle, become more collected. We call it stability or collectedness of mind, samadhi, which prepares the mind for wisdom. These five, each of these, inside these five, within these five, is important. So something is pushing you to be here every week. So hats off to that, if I were to be wearing hats. But so please acknowledge what needs to be acknowledged. Okay, when Piaget, or in other cases, psychologists, child psychologists, etc., we talk about negative reinforcements or positive reinforcements. So let's be wise about what kind of a reinforcement I'm offering myself. Be generous, be fair. If you're offering some reinforcement to your, let's say, addictive qualities, okay, please don't be ignoring the others. And see how it feels when, let's say, two people here, Greg, and now we're offering you positive things. Well, facts. We're not just, it's not just, these are facts. How is it registering? How are you feeling it in your body? Is there a sense of like pushing this? Oh no, I don't deserve this. Stay away. No, this is not true. I know. It's like, this is not, no. So developing the capacity of tolerating your goodness, tolerating for mattering in a positive way, oneself, is crucial. So thank you for that. And yeah, I think we're good with time. So I will, next week will be the sutta. I believe Dhammadina sent you the link. From what I recall, it's the Sihanada Sutta. Let us share some merits. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find health relief. May all beings share in these merits that we have thus acquired, for the achievement of all kinds of wholesome happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share in these merits. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Let's be authentic with ourselves, but gentle also. It's important. Kind. Loving with ourselves, but truthful at the same time. So I'll see you next week. May your smiles never fade away, and may your hearts experience contentedness and happiness and the serenity that Dhamma offers. Be well.